Hello and welcome to On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. On March 20th, 2019, I released the episode of And the Runner-Up Is on the 1971 Best Picture race, where we discussed The Last Picture Show as the likely runner-up that lost Best Picture to The French Connection. But on second thought, what if the runner-up was really Fiddler on the Roof?
Tradition! 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 Tradition!
Hello, and welcome back to On Second Thought, where we discuss another Best Picture nominee that we did not cover as the runner-up on the main show, and discuss whether it may have actually been the runner-up. I'm Kevin Jacobson, of course, and we are revisiting 1971 today, 50 years ago. And on the main show, I said that The Last Picture Show was the runner-up to The French Connection, but today we are discussing if it actually could have been another film, Fiddler on the Roof. And my first guest, you've heard on the main show once for the Cider House Rules and the Best Picture lineup of 1999, in addition to 3 episodes of On Second Thought about Lincoln, Shine, and The Killing Fields. Truly, I mean, look at the diversity of that. My great, great friend, Michael Schwartz. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you, Kevin, for the warm welcome. It's always a pleasure to be back with the program, and I'm so excited to be talking about Fiddler on the Roof today. This is going to be a really exciting episode, so thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. I had to have you on for this one because I actually remember, I think you said in a DM to me, like, hey, like, if you're doing Fiddler on the Roof as the runner-up, like, keep me in mind, and I didn't ultimately do that, so here's my way of making it up to you.
Yes, absolutely.
And my other guest has been on 2 episodes of On Second Thought before for The Descendants and also The Killing Fields. So we have a little mini reunion here from Next Best Picture. It's Dan Bayer.
Shalom.
Yes. Here we are, fellas. Are we ready to jump into this incredible musical epic?
I've been ready my entire life for this, so
yes.
Do it.
Okay. Well, here we go. We're going to try to cover as much as we can while keeping it within a good enough time frame so that it's not like 3 hours like this film. So, Fiddler on the Roof. It is a musical based on the Broadway musical of the same name, which tells the story of a Jewish family living in Anatevka in Ukraine, in a shtetl in the Pale of Settlement in 1905. The protagonist is Tevye, who is a poor milkman who is married to Goldie. They have 5 daughters together who they are hoping to get married off to other men in the village. There is also a Marxist named Perchik who is questioning some of the strict traditions in the village, and he falls in love with one of the daughters. Eventually, the village is uprooted by a pogrom, and the villagers are forced to confront the idea of saying goodbye to this place while they're also dealing with their own personal lives. So the film was directed by Norman Jewison and written by Joseph Stein, the original writer of the book of the musical. It stars Topol as Tevye, Norma Crane as Golda, Leonard Fry, Molly Picon, Paul Mann, Rosalind Harris, Michelle March, Neva Small, and Paul Michael Glaser, among many, many others. And Fiddler on the Roof made $80 million at the U.S. box office. It was one of the biggest hits of the year, and it was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, winning 3, but not Best Picture. Well, I think it's time to just kick this off by starting off with Michael. I mean, you obviously have a strong relationship to this film, as I know, this property. I'm curious if you could just start with the film itself before getting into just the history of it all.
Sure. So I think Fiddler on the Roof, when you look at when it really came into the public eye in the mid-'60s, this was a show that was a hit right off the bat. So when the movie came to be, you had very high anticipation, sort of like a West Side Story or The Sound of Music. There were lines around the block to see it. It was a cultural event for American Jews of the mid 20th century. And you always hold your breath when you see a movie musical because you always want it to live up to what you saw on stage, the magic that Jerry Robbins and company were able to put on at the Imperial Theater for years. And what I love about the Fiddler film is that it not only lives up to your expectations and what you loved about the show, but it presents everything in a new light, almost like what Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner just did with West Side Story. You see this universe opened up in a new way. You see a more dramatic performance with Topol as Tevye. You see everything in a brand new light, and it doesn't take away from what Zero Mostel and Jerry Robbins did on stage, because that is iconic in its own sense, always will be. But I think this is the Fiddler that most people will associate with material. When they say Fiddler on the Roof, they think of Topol. They think of this film. They think of everything that comes along with what Norman Jewison was able to do in putting it on a grand, epic scale. And between the Oscar success, between the box office success, it is a film that 50 years later we are still talking about and is probably the best remembered film of that Oscar lineup.
Wow, tough act to follow, Dan Bayer. What are your thoughts on Fiddler on the Roof?
Frankly, I just think it is one of the greatest stage to screen adaptations ever made. I obviously, for obvious reasons, love the musical. It is such a, like Michael said, it's a real cultural moment, I think, for all Jews seeing the stage show or this film version. And what I love about this film version of the musical is that it makes everything so beautifully real while somehow keeping that theatricality of the stage and adapting it to film. I think Topol's performance as Tevye is one of the great screen performances. It always makes me sad that he didn't win this year, even though I do, frankly, love Gene Hackman and The French Connection. But there is something very special about that performance in the way that it manages to be theatrical the way Zero Mostel was on stage with the more realistic type of acting you need to see on screen. It doesn't go over the top somehow, and that strikes me as a really incredible balancing act. And on top of that, you just have this story and these songs that just are so wonderful and delightful no matter what milieu you hear them in. It's a touching story that I think anyone can relate to, and the songs are all-time classics. It's a great film.
Yeah, and just before I get into my own thoughts on the film, what was your experience, both of you, with seeing it on stage?
So I think I've seen Fiddler on stage probably somewhere between 8 to 10 times. Wow. I've seen it. Anytime there's a production, I will go up and see it. Usually multiple times, because you go up with family members, you go up with your friends in the city. It is a thing. Like when Fiddler's on, the Jews flock. That's just like a roll of
This
science.
is true. This is very, very true.
Yes. So I've seen the production with Alfred Molina, the one with Harvey Fierstein, the one with Danny Burstein. I saw the Yiddish production right before COVID, which honestly I think is the best staging I've ever seen of it. Just felt so much more authentic and real and lived in a way that I never even expected Fiddler could be. So seeing it on stage is wonderful because it feels like a staged piece. You have the Jerry Robbins choreography that is just so absolutely brilliant in tradition and matchmaker and the Chava sequence. And don't get me wrong, the choreography in the film is terrific, but it's a different type of choreography. It evokes different emotions than when you see it on stage. So I love that both properties can really stand on their own and offer different emotions and different feelings.
Yeah, I've seen it not quite as many times as Michael, I don't think. But I do remember when I was very young driving up to the Bushnell Theater, which I think, Kevin, you may recognize.
Yes. My local theater. Yep.
Yeah. And seeing a touring production of this. And it was, I'm too young to remember who exactly I saw, but it was either Theodore Bikel or Topol himself. And that was the first time I remember seeing it on stage. Although, according to my parents, we did see it before that when I was much younger, but I don't remember that. And it was just, that was a very formative experience. And I saw my synagogue did a production of it one year, and I saw that. And I've done some of the songs in it in like in reviews and cabarets and stuff like that. So I have a lot of experience with the score. And I did see the Denny Bernstein revival, which I thought he was very, very oddly cast, but he made it work.
Well, I would say among the three of us, I am definitely the person with the least history with this material. Haven't even seen the musical once. I had only seen the film once, actually, before watching it again for this. So there were parts that I straight up didn't even remember. So this was very refreshing. And I'm sure that I'm going to probably have different takes compared to the both of you who really seem to just sort of know this in your bones. But I have to say that this was probably even more effective to me on this watch than when I'd seen it before, because I think also because of timing, weirdly enough, having very recently watched the new West Side Story, which is, of course, another epic musical about community and cultural divide, and sort of put me in the mindset to appreciate this even more because it is so much more specifically about that sense of community. And I just think the bones of this story are so strong to begin with, and Tevye is such a great character to see this world through that you're pretty much halfway there in terms of creating a film with a good foundation. But what Norman Jewison does is, I think, really create a very rich texture and really opens it up just enough to be still confined within this village, but also creative with the camera work and making use of the surroundings. I mean, I don't think it's revolutionary, but in terms of adapting it to a new medium, it's really strong work that I think can maybe sometimes be overshadowed by the more inventive directors, especially if you think about this in 1971 with New Hollywood and really sort of trying to do new things with the art form. Here, this is just like really great old-fashioned classic movie making, and it isn't being in your face with style and flashiness, even though it is very impressive. And there's something to be said for a director who can keep your attention for 3 hours, and you can still feel that length sometimes, but not in a way that you would want to cut anything out. Like, it all feels pretty vital.
I think he is one of the greatest directors of the 20th century who doesn't always get his due.
Right.
He's directed a Best Picture winner, yet he doesn't have a competitive Oscar himself. He's the man behind The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, and In the Heat of the Night, Moonstruck, all these wonderful films from the 20th century, and he's still with us. We love Norman Jewison.
Yeah.
And it's just great to talk about him in that context because he is a real workman-like director who always gets that final product across the finish line, does it with ease, makes it look so easy and brilliant. I think the funniest story about him in regard to this film is that they literally hired him for this based on his last name, thinking he was Jewish.
Yeah.
And he's not. That's the funniest part.
Yeah.
They're like, Norman Jewison, he could do it. And he's like,
I love
nope,
that story.
I'll still do it. But he just understands the material so well. And it just goes to highlight the universal nature of this material and how he could really see what it's all about, understand what needs to be highlighted, and just do a great job of transitioning from stage to screen. I love him, and I think he did a fantastic job with this.
He's the definition of like understanding the assignment as far as a director goes. Like, he, no matter what genre or type of story you're telling, he knows exactly how to put it on stage and on screen, in the best way. I remember just the first time that I watched this film being blown away by just the look of it. It looks like very few other films that I've seen. It has this really earthy tone to the cinematography, but it still has that glow of sunlight to it. It's very interesting, and I particularly love some of the later scenes where it almost looks like he has this like gauze filter over the cameras, but you can still see everything so clearly.
Yeah, the imagery, especially during the Chava sequence of the three daughters dancing.
Yeah.
That is one of my favorite shots of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I especially love the opening of the movie when with the pictures of the town of Anatofka and, of course, the titular fiddler himself.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a great place to start. I think we can sort of talk about this in the two acts, much like we did actually just with the emigrants last month for this show. Starting with, yes, the tradition prologue and the hundreds of extras. I mean, first of all, an iconic location song opener here with tradition where you really get a sense immediately of where you are and all the different roles and how everyone contributes and how the idea of tradition and customs is so inherent in this culture and something that they take pride in, you know, even while living in some not so great conditions. And obviously with Tevye here, we have the perfect sort of conduit for that idea as this man who's very much a traditionalist, but also is just carrying on with life and not really wanting to wallow in the circumstances that he's in, but really is finding some contentment and sort of finding hope. And there's something very stirring about that right away that you really get in this long opening number. And yeah, also absolutely, while we're here, I wanted to note the actual shot of the fiddler on the roof just in shadow against that orange sky. I mean, there are so many just gorgeous frames in this that you want it framed. So many shots.
Yeah, and the fiddler, of course, makes appearances throughout the film. Every once in a while, he's like a walking metaphor, of course, for everything going on in this village. And to have the film start with him, have him appear at the right moments, and of course, we'll talk later about how he's used in the end. But it is just such an impactful metaphor on stage, on screen, no matter how you're doing Fiddler. Even in the worst production of Fiddler, you just have that character there, and you understand what everything's about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of, I feel like it's for me, it's like easy to sort of keep track of everything in the story just by going to each musical number. Going to like Matchmaker, that sequence with the daughters who start out sort of dreaming about their future marriages and then very quickly realizing that they probably won't like whoever it is they'll be arranged to marry, which sets up their desire to be more independent and to break free from this tradition. And I think this is another one of the songs here that has a cheerful kind of air to it, but is also talking about something heavier, you know, which is that they're from a poor family, and that means they'll probably be arranged with men they don't really want to marry. And it's this sort of way of coping with some of the traumas of life just by joking or being sarcastic or being lighter about it, which I think really runs through a lot of the film, even like, you know, between these different generations. So that really is always something that strikes me, is that this is such heavy material when you really think about it, but you still have a really good time through a lot of the film because of these characters.
And these are concepts that are still in existence throughout much of, you know, society outside of our bubbles. Like if you go to an Orthodox Jewish community or an Indian community, they still use arranged marriages and matchmakers, maybe not the same way that's presented in this film. And there is more freedom, just as you see with the character of Seidel and, of course, Hadal and Chava. That's what this is all about, with changing norms and changing rules in society, that there are still ways of life that you live by, but the way that we incorporate them into our lives can adapt.
Right. And I certainly love If I Were a Rich Man. Obviously, it's iconic for a reason. And in this very specific story, you could see why it's one of those songs that resonates the most with a universal audience. And I love the staging of it, the way the dust is sort of kicking up as he's stomping around and the shimmying. It's so lively. And he brings so much of that energy there. And the way the instrumentation sort of kicks in is so effective. And again, it's so thematically rich, pun intended, because it's him bragging about like everything he would do if he were rich, but also that he would have more time to devote to God and to spoil his family and to really live a happy life. And you see once again under this catchy song that there's something very personal here and universal. And yeah, so actually this is a slight tangent, but I've noticed with the shimmying, because I watched the Fiddler documentary Miracle of Miracles, which was out a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I've just noticed, since I have literally never seen an actual production, that a lot of the Tevye characters do that kind of shimmy action. And I don't know if that was something from the stage or from this film that seems like it's carried through everywhere.
I
That's
think it's
from the
been
stage.
with the character since the beginning.
Okay, yeah, just wondering.
Yeah. And what's important to note is that Zero Mostel, who originated the role of Tevye on stage, he was the attraction. Obviously, people were going to see
Yeah.
Fiddler, but you also went to go see Zero Mostel. And when you saw Zero Mostel, you got the Zero Mostel show co-starring Fiddler. He would break the fourth wall, interact with the audience, drive his fellow actors crazy because he was Zero being Zero, and he would not let you forget that you were watching Zero Mostel. So all these other actors who did it on stage, they tried to make it their own, but they also had to give the audience what they wanted, even when Zero wasn't there. And what I love about Topol here is, as wonderful as Zero is, he makes this a much more grounded performance in every sense outside of If I Were a Rich Man. In this song, he's going full Zero, and that is much appreciated because it just works.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why this musical has been so popular throughout the years, and I think it is because so many people can relate to Tevye, and he is a very specific type of everyman, but he's still an everyman. His fears and his wants are easily translatable across all cultural boundaries. You know, you want your daughters to marry someone nice. You want them to be happy in life. You want to, you know, do good work and enjoy it. And you want to have time for yourself and whatever higher power you believe in. Or if you don't believe in a higher power, then something else that you believe is higher than just like the everyday stuff. And one of the fantastic things about Topol's performance is that he really just revels in that joie de vivre that he has, but also really wrestles with the problems that present themselves to him, and he digs deep for both of those things, and I think that speaks to a lot of people.
Thank you for listening to this preview of On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup.is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes, a Slack channel, and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.